morning we have a special treat. We have our young musician here is going to give us a tune on his horn. It's going to be Amazing Grace. Scott, you're on. Scott Booth. From the book of Matthew, chapter 22, verses 15 through 22. Then the Pharisees went and plotted to entrap him in what they said, so that they sent their disciples to him, along with the Hadrians, to saying, Teacher, we know you are sincere, and teach the way of God in accordance with truth, and show defiance to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax. And they brought him a denarius. Then he said to them, Whose head is this, and whose title? And they answered, The emperor's. Then he said to them, Give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's. When they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away. And that's the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. And the hymn of preparation is Nearer My God to Thee, 528. Notice on the bulletin I entitled this a stewardship message. Well, you probably all groaned when you saw that. But it's not all about the money. You see, Pharisees knew that Jesus had their number, and Jesus had been teaching his disciples to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. Their brand of religion was like a bacteria that would invade and consume. They were blind guides that led others astray. Instead of serving God, they served themselves. Instead of helping the needy, they fed off the orphans and the widows. And if his teaching were not enough, there was the whole cleansing of the temple thing. Jesus clearly had no respect for their kind of authority. And they could see the threat. So the Pharisees decided to attack in self-defense. They came to him and pretended to be asking a sincere question of faith. Should we pay taxes to the Romans? The question really was a legitimate question. I mean, after all, the Romans were pagans and their government enslaved people all over the world. Should God's people really support such a government? Of course, Jesus saw right through their question. It was a trap, a catch-22. No matter how he would answer, they would get him. If he said they should not pay taxes, then they would go to the Romans and have him arrested for treason. If, on the other hand, he said they should pay taxes, they could use that against him. They could say that he did not have enough faith in God or that he was a little more than a tax collector in religious clothing. As Jesus could so easily do, he turned the question back on the questioners. Show me the coin used to pay the taxes. It was a Roman coin with the name and image of the emperor onto it. So Jesus said, give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. Or if he has his name on it, give it to him. He could have stopped right there because he had answered the question. But he went on to say, and render unto God the things that are God's. That's from King James. That is the point of this passage. Render unto God the things that are God's. Everyone repeat after me. Render unto God the things that are God's.
Render unto God the things that are God's.
You see, that is what the Pharisees were not doing. They were not giving God his due. They were serving themselves and not God. Now the question then is this. What's due to God? Now this is supposed to be a stewardship message. So at this point, you would expect me to say that God is due 1/10 of your income. In other words, that you should tithe regularly, give 1/10 of the money you make to the church. That a tenth or a tithe belongs to God. That is why the bulletin used to say God's tithes and other offerings, or something like that. When I first decided to preach on this passage, that is what I thought I was going to say. I thought, give unto God the things that are God's. That means give God the tithe. Then I got to thinking, did you know that the Pharisees tithe? In fact, they were probably the best tithers among God's people. Jesus himself said that they had even tithed mint and dill and cumin. That's Matthew 23:23. Well, just let me quote that. This is Matthew 23:23. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the most important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have preached the latter without neglecting the former. Now, does anyone here have a herb garden? Well, if you do, then why don't you give 1/10 of what you grow in your garden to the church? What about your vegetable gardens? I love fresh corn and tomatoes, although the season's getting about past. So the Pharisees were really good tithers. And yet Jesus told them they still needed to render unto God the things that are God's. So Jesus was not talking about tithing money. Don't get me wrong, you should tithe, but ultimately, this passage is not about something as meaningless as money. Oh yeah, coins and taxes are involved in the story, but in the end, Jesus is talking about much more than mere money. If we are to render unto God that are God's, we should give everything to God. Again, I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about giving our entire lives to God. Humor me a little bit here. Let me illustrate what I mean. Everybody take in a deep breath with me. In. Out. In. Out. God gave you that breath. If God had not given you that breath, you would be turning blue right now. Every single breath you take is a gift from God. So every breath we take is due to God. We should use every breath to serve God.